Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere a little grim. But don't worry, you're already doomed. The air smells like sweat, cinnamon, and administrative despair. You've just arrived in Istanbul, or as they call it now, Constantinople but Ottoman. The skyline is beautiful. All domes, minarets, and pigeons that seem suspiciously judgmental. You stand before the gates of the sublime port, hoping to find work or a bath, or maybe even a sense of purpose. But what you'll find instead is a system so labyrinthine that even its creators likely forgot which hallway led where. Somewhere, a man is stamping a paper that authorizes another man to stamp your paper, which is only valid if held upside down on a Tuesday. You want to bathe, a simple act. You stink though. To be fair, everyone else does too. Unfortunately, bathing in this city requires 7 layers of paperwork, 3 coins, and a goat. Not the meat, the whole goat. You are told by a man in a velvet hat that the goat must have witnessed your birth or the document is void. You smile politely, nod, and slowly back away before he assigns you to the Department of Bucket Inspections. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, the local time. I'm always curious who else is wide awake and wandering through history this late. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn, squashed between 2 other petitioners on a mat that smells like damp olives and regrets. Today's your big day. Your first attempt at getting anything done in the Ottoman capital. Maybe a permit, maybe a snack. Your stomach growls, which in this city could qualify as a public disturbance if not properly muffled. You shuffle toward the official bureau for. You are not sure anymore. The nameplate is in Arabic script, stylized, confusing, and slightly singed round the edges. A man who looks 700 years old gestures at you with a feather quill, then gestures at the goat behind you. Apparently, you've skipped step 4. You skipped step 1, 2, but no one's noticed yet. The bureaucracy here is as old as the empire itself, no, older. Some historians still argue whether it descended from Byzantine systems or emerged fully formed from a particularly stubborn calligrapher's dream. What's clear is that it now functions like a living being. It breathes, it digests, and it will slowly consume your hope one line at a time. You spend the morning in queue. Not in line part of the line. The line has its own guard, its own tea service, and possibly its own tiny sultan. The woman in front of you explains she's been here since last Thursday trying to register her cat as a tax-deductible mouser. The man behind you whispers that he's technically already dead, but the paperwork to confirm it is still pending. You finally reach the front desk. His scribe, swaddled in ink-stained robes and a gaze that's seen too much, lifts one eyebrow. Form 7F. He grunts, without looking up. You blink. He sighs. Somewhere behind him, drawers open and shut on their own. There are so many forms. One to enter the building, one to speak to the man, one to confirm that you are, in fact, the person filling out the forms. You're asked for your birthplace, your father's favorite spice, and whether you've ever eaten a suspicious melon. There's even a form to confirm you've submitted the correct form, signed by a witness who must be both illiterate and completely bald. This isn't even the department you need. You get redirected to another building with nearly the same name, located 14 cobbled streets away, and only accessible if you cross a bridge guarded by 3 angry fishmongers. Not people, actual fishmongers, angry about a shipment of tilapia that went missing in 1684. They're still looking for it. On your way, you pass a man yelling about rugs, another yelling at the rugs. and a child trying to sell you a license to shout. You don't shout. You nod, politely. That costs you to carpe dot by the time you find the next office. The official seal maker has gone home for his afternoon nap, which historically could last anywhere between 20 minutes and 3 days. Your tunic is damp still from this morning's fog, your own sweat, and possibly the tears of the last person who tried to open a spice stand without provincial clearance. You consider giving up. You consider throwing yourself into the Bosphorus. But then you remember, you need a permit. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so are your neighbors. The silence is only broken by the scratching of quills and a distant sheep being notarized. You lie down next to a wall of rejected petitions, each neatly rolled and tied in black string. You are not sure whether to be impressed or horrified by how neatly despair can be catalogued. A boy sweeps past you, barefoot, holding a small tray with 7 tiny cups of coffee. You grab one, desperate for energy, but he snatches it back. You haven't filed for beverage eligibility. He says, tomorrow, maybe you'll try the Department of Sand Weights, or see if you can trade your goat for a temporary ink license. But for now, you curl up on a stack of scrolls, trying to remember if you even wanted to do anything in this city to begin with. The morning begins again, not with a sunrise, but with a rooster that apparently forgot how to crow and instead makes a wheezing sound that somehow still wakes you. Your bones ache. Your left knee is unsure whether it still belongs to you. The scroll you used as a pillow now has ink stains on your cheek in the shape of an angry tulip. You rise slowly. Not from energy, but because the floor is colder than the bureaucrat who refused your bath request yesterday. Today, you have a new plan. Open a coffee shop, or at least get someone to acknowledge your desire to serve hot liquid to tired humans. You imagine a warm corner stall, little cups steaming, the soft clink of saucers, people murmuring about politics and taxes and why the Sultan's mustache looked extra majestic last Thursday. But first you'll need approval from no fewer than 11 offices, 2 of which don't have official addresses and 1 of which is closed indefinitely due to existential review. You navigate through narrow alleys where peddlers shout things like licorice for your lice and authorized dirt unstepped. You dodge a flock of bureaucrats in training wide-eyed teenagers with miniature inkwells strapped to their waists like weapons and finally reach the Office of Regulated Beverage Dispensation. The building is pink. Not painted pink, just naturally tinged by centuries of rage, rosewater accidents, and probably one unfortunate flamingo incident inside. A clerk waves you over with a feather that might once have belonged to a very disgruntled peacock. You hand over your first form, carefully folded into thirds as instructed. He unfolds it, stares, refolds it into sevenths. Your permit application lacks a caffeination code. He says without blinking, you didn't know there was such a thing. Subsection 4B. He continues, gesturing toward a wall of scrolls taller than your self-esteem. Also, coffee was banned last year. You blink. But there are at least 7 cafes round the corner. He shrugs. They have cousins in the Yale Islam's Cousins Embroidery Guild. This, in Ottoman logic, makes perfect sense. So you do what anyone would do. You head for the cousin's cousin. After 3 hours of walking in circles and being redirected to a man who claims to only speak in bird calls, you find the embroidery guild in question. It smells like boiled wool and diplomacy. A man seated cross-legged on a cushion weaves a needle at you. To open a cafe, he says, you must first embroider a tulip, blindfolded, while fasting. This is not a joke. You manage to stab yourself 6 times before the guild master takes pity on you and hands you a sealed token. Give this to the inspector of spoons, he says. He's on the roof of the old observatory. The climb is steep. The observatory is abandoned. Except for a one-eyed cat and a man in a hat shaped like a cloud. Here is the token, then eyes. You'll also need the Bureau of Daylight Approvals to review your cafe's angle to the sun and a noise level audit, plus a general vibe clearance. You nod, as if any of this is acceptable. Historians still argue whether the coffee bans in the Ottoman Empire were purely religious, deeply political, or simply a power move by sultans who couldn't handle public caffeine-fueled debates. What's clear is that the bans were selectively enforced. If your stall was too popular, you got shut down. If your cousin was powerful, you got funding. Meanwhile, a man named Yusuf once sold bootleg coffee under the disguise of a vinegar stand. He lasted 5 years and is now either a folk hero or a shadow depending on which scrolls you believe. You try a different route. Maybe tea. You whisper it like a confession. But someone hears. A passing bureaucrat in tasseled robes pulls you aside. Tea is regulated under the Textile Act of 1589. He says, any infusion requires fabric alignment certification. You stare blankly. He pats your shoulder. Don't worry. There's a man near the fish market who knows a loophole involving cumin, chalk, and a handshake. You're not sure if he's joking or writing poetry. Either way, you trudge back into the street, which by now smells like burnt honey and bureaucratic sweat. You pass a cafe, open, bustling. A young man smiles and gestures toward an empty seat. Want some? He asks, you sit. He pours. The coffee is warm. Bitter. Perfect. How'd you get licensed? You whisper. He winks. I didn't. Your stomach turns. Not from fear, but from longing. You sip slowly. Knowing each drop is illegal and more comforting than any permit ever could be. A shadow moves across the table. The spoon inspector. You freeze. He nods once, then walks away. Apparently, even the enforcers need a break. Remember that goat from yesterday? It turns out he's now applying for beverage rights. You see him in line outside the registry of heated liquids, chewing paper and somehow still ahead of you in the queue. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But the cup in your hand is full. And for now, that's enough. Your dream of running a coffee shop fades not because it's impossible, but because it might take until your next life. The goats, you've learned something. In the Ottoman Empire, bureaucracy is not about logic or law, it's about layers. Layers of paper, favors, relationships, silk threads, and patience, and perhaps that's why coffee tasted so good here. Not because of the beans, but because you had to fight so hard to even hold the cup today. You want a job, something simple, modest, respectable. Maybe in the military, nothing too stabby, but perhaps a support role. You've heard the Janissaries get paid regularly and wear nice hats. You like hats. You also like the idea of eating 3 meals a day and not having to convince someone's uncle's goat that you're allowed to exist. So you head toward the Imperial Barracks, following a trail of polished helmets, clanking boots, and the faint scent of boiled leather and bureaucracy. The guards outside the gates look at you with the expression of men who've memorized 17 different ways to say no. You explain that you wish to enlist. One raises a brow. As a Janissary, he says, as if you've asked to marry the Sultan's candelabra. You'll need a recommendation scroll from a village elder, a purity inspection certificate, and a letter verifying that your great-grandmother never insulted a falcon. You did not bring these things. You don't even have a falcon ready. Great-grandmother on hand, still. He waves you inside, probably for his own amusement. You pass into a large hall where a man is shouting at a book, and the book appears to be shouting back. This is the payroll office. The Janissary payroll is legendary not for how it works, But for how it doesn't. There are men here who signed up 5 years ago and still haven't seen a single coin. One of them sits in a corner gently counting imaginary money and mouthing the word soon. You wait behind a man who claims to be 132 years old. No one questions him. Time moves strangely in bureaucracies. He's told to submit proof of continued life. He vanishes into a side room labeled verification of breathing. Eventually, you're handed a thick form titled request for future compensation conditional. It includes questions like, have you ever accidentally served another empire? Rate your ability to wield a polem. 1 equals noodle, 10 equals terrifying. Do you understand that payment is not guaranteed, but spiritually implied? You lie politely. It feels right. You are then ushered into a recruitment chamber, where an old officer squints at your feet to symmetrical. He mutters, we prefer arch variants. He checks a box. But we can overlook that if you can carry a cannonball while reciting imperial poetry backwards, you do your best. The cannonball is heavier than your childhood, the poetry confusingly sensual. Somehow, you pass. You are now a janissary, technically. They give you a sash. It's itchy and smells faintly of cardamom and resignation. No one tells you what to do next. You wander the grounds. Men are practicing swordplay, arguing about meat distribution and playing what appears to be bureaucratic charades. One man pretends to be a missing requisition form. Everyone guesses for 9B. They're correct. You ask when you'll be paid. A nearby veteran snorts. Oh, they'll pay you eventually, maybe posthumously. You laugh. He does not. Historians still argue whether the janissary payroll delays were intentional, accidental, or simply the result of accounting methods that involve dice, astrology, and the occasional pigeon. What's undeniable is that ghost payments wages issued to soldiers who had either fled, died, or never existed were common. Entire regiments of imaginary men haunted the ledgers, drawing salaries more regularly than you ever will. A man named Hal was once paid in full tears after falling off a bridge. His cousin used the wages to build a shrine to the bridge. You tried to file just wondering about wages form. The clerk sighs and gives you another form titled appreciation. Overcompensation, reflection. You have to answer essay questions like, what does loyalty taste like if you were silver? How tarnished would you be? You abandon the form. Your pen breaks. Your spirit also makes a soft snapping noise. That evening, your comrades sit round a fire, roasting meat, singing songs about long-lost payments and boots that never fit. One offers you a piece of grilled onion. Eat. He says, it's the only raise you'll get this decade. You nod. The onion tastes honest. Your phone is still dead. But at this point, you could use it as currency. If you had reception, you'd text your past self. Don't do it. The sash is itchy and the pay is theoretical. The next morning, you report for drill. You're handed a musket without powder, shoes without soles, and orders without grammar. You stand for hours, staring at the horizon, which offers nothing in return. Finally, a trumpet sounds, march. To where? No one knows. You march anyway, somewhere in the imperial ledger. The clerk adds your name to a list of paid soldiers. They'll never find the ink again. Remember that goat? He's now listed as a reserve artillery officer. His salary is already pending. You think he winked at you. The fire dies down. The onion is gone. Your sash is unraveling. You lie back in the dirt, uncertain whether you're a soldier, a number, or just another misplaced fowl. But at least you're warm. The rooster has given up this morning. You're woken by the sound of quills scratching furiously across parchment, like 1,000 tiny feet skittering toward your dignity. The barracks smell like damp wool and ambition. You're no longer a fresh recruit. You are now a cog in a very dusty machine today. You've been reassigned. They call it a civilian military liaison role. You call it what it is, a demotion to the Department of Feather Quill Reconciliation, apparently. Imperial scribes use so many quills that the Empire has an entire bureau dedicated to counting them. Not just the new ones, all of them used, snapped, hacked, broken, misplaced, ceremonial, ornamental, suspiciously large. Each has a category, and it's your job to log them. You're led into a room that's colder than your chances at upward mobility. Inside, hundreds of drawers, each labeled with terrifying precision. Left-wing goose feathers, slightly damp, quills with pre-stamped ink smudges, rejected ostrich plumes, mildly cursed. Your supervisor is a man named Selim, who may or may not be alive. He breathes like a moth flapping against a window pane. We count. He says, we count so others may. Right. Inspirational. Your first assignment is to inventory the Imperial Miscellaneous Feather Archive. You open a drawer and immediately sneeze. The dust is so fine it enters your soul. Inside, feathers, bundled in twine, annotated in calligraphy. So beautiful you feel unworthy just looking at it. Selim coughs. Log them by curvature and mood. You stare. Mood. He hands you a chart. It includes categories like wistful, belligerent, and existentially compromised to you. Select a feather that looks particularly unsure of itself and mark it as melancholic. It feels right. This is your life now. Historians still argue whether the feather counting system was an actual logistical necessity or simply a result of imperial overspecialization. There's evidence of entire scribe teams who refuse to work without a specific quill weight to page ratio, believing lighter feathers led to more poetic handwriting. Others claim the practice began after a palace cat swallowed the roaming quill, causing a bureaucratic breakdown so severe they created for new offices just to avoid repeat incidents. You spend the day cataloging, sneezing, and questioning your existence. By late afternoon, you've logged 113 optimistic goose feathers and one that was definitely resentful. Selim nods with quiet approval. You might get promoted to the registry of pen nibs if you keep this up. You're not sure whether to cry or write a limerick. The job isn't all bad. It's warm, quiet. You're given lunch a grey lentil paste. That tastes like bureaucracy feels, endless, bland, and slightly chalky. A pigeon flies in through the window, drops a feather, and leaves. You stare at the feather. Selim nods solemnly. We'll add it to the undecideds. There's a book on your desk titled A Brief History of Noteworthy Quills. You skim it. One entry is about a sultan's favorite pen, made from a swan feather and dipped only in imported fig ink. It was lost during a tax dispute and has never been recovered. Rumor says it still haunts the Treasury building. Another entry tells of a scribe who could write an entire imperial decree with a single feather provided he was standing on one foot and singing. The foot part was negotiable, the singing was not. You stretch your legs and knock over a stack of scrolls. Selim doesn't flinch. The scrolls have accepted their fate. He whispers, you nod, and immediately categorize his whisper as quill-like. Somber tone. By evening, your fingers are black with ink. Your tunic is now one solid wrinkle. A spider has taken up residence inside your inkwell and seems to be lobbying for land rights. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but you would aren't be able to use it anyway. There's no signal in the Department of Feather-Based Metrics. A young apprentice joins you near sunset. His name is Immer. He's enthusiastic, dangerous. I alphabetized the draw labels. He says proudly. You panic. Alphabetizing throws off the emotional resonance. Order.selim size. We'll have to start again. You feel a strange sense of relief. The idea that anything can never truly be finished is oddly comforting. In this empire, endings are as rare as accurate census records. Remember your dream of opening a cafe. That version of you never sniffed goose down until his brain went numb. Remember the sash you were given as a janissary. It now holds your ink. Blotter, that's what they call career repurposing. A man walks in with a scroll requesting an audit of all feathers logged in a melancholy category, but used in joyful correspondence. You give him a 1,000-yard stare. He leaves. You finally close the drawer marked Private Plume Confessions. No one speaks, not even the feathers. You lie on your cot that night, surrounded by quills that once touched decrees, poetry, confessions, and shopping lists. The silence is soft, like a whisper of paper on parchment, the kind of silence that says, "You don't matter, but you do fit nicely in this straw." Sleep comes slowly, but it does come. The next morning unfolds like wet parchment slow, heavy, and faintly smelling of mold. You rise from your cot, now partially fused to a stack of rejected feather audits, and blink into the dull grey light filtering through the bureaucratic haze. Your joints make a sound like unlatching a rusted drawer. There's no rooster today. Only the distant shuffle of sandals and the soft muttering of a clerk somewhere reciting stamped codes like Bedtime pra. Ears, you've been reassigned again. Progress. Maybe. Punishment. Almost certainly. Your new role is deceptively important sounding. Assistant to the Provincial Revenue Liaison for Residential Enumeration. What that really means is you'll be helping tally up taxes that everyone pretends to pay, filing totals no one will read, and bribing people you didn't know existed to forget that any of it happened. Your boss is a man named Orhan, a gaunt figure with a mustache that moves more than his lips. He greets you with a sigh, a ledger, and a lukewarm turn-up. "We count," he says, echoing the motto from the feather department. But badly, today's assignment: visit for neighborhoods along the Bosphorus and collect property taxes from citizens who have either fled, died, become fog, or never existed in the first place. You are handed a pouch of outdated corns, an ink-stained abacus, and a scroll titled Provisional Guidelines for the Suggestion of Tax Compliance. You ask if there's a standard tax rate. Orhan chuckles, then coughs, then chuckles again. Standard. My boy, we haven't seen standard since Suleiman's dog ran off with the last one. You take that as a no. The first neighborhood is uphill, damp and slightly too quiet. You knock on the wooden door. It opens a crack. A man peers out, sees your ledger, and slams it shut. That counts as a verbal denial of taxation. You write it down. The second house belongs to a widow who insists she already paid taxes in advance for her grandchildren. She shows you a crumbling slip signed by a man named Fark. Your ledger doesn't mention Fark. Orhan later tells you Fark was an experimental tax collector who accepted payment in onions and once declared a seagull a special property. The third house is empty, but a chicken roams inside. You decide that's partial occupancy and calculate the hen's liability in egg equivalents. A passing official disagrees. Poultry is only taxable if roosting above waist height. He says, quoting a rule from 1641 that hasn't been repealed, but also hasn't been believed in since the Great Feather Incident. You lower the chicken gently and mark the house as exempt. The fourth residence is a stone hut that may or may not be inhabited by ghosts. You knock. No answer. You leave a tax notice tied to a pebble and roll it through the door. That counts as passive compliance pending metaphysical review. You're learning. Historians still argue whether Ottoman tax collection was chaotic by design or simply the organic result of overlapping systems never meant to work together. There were dozens of tax categories: salt tax, bridge tax, windmill tax, non-windmill tax, yes. even for things that weren't windmills, and one particularly cursed levy on beards shaped like the moon. Some were enforced to the letter, others existed purely to confuse invaders or citizens. By sunset, your ledger is filled with marginalia, question marks, and a faint coffee stain in the shape of a cat. You report back to Orhan. He looks over your notes with mild surprise. Only one hunting and to poultry disputes. Efficient. He signs off on your day's work and gives you a half coin for dinner. Half of what? He doesn't say. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But today, a man offered to trade you a tax exemption if you could guess his mother's shoe size from a list of Ottoman pashas. You are only one size off. Back at your quarters, you sit on the steps with your dinner. Boiled lentils, lukewarm, somehow chewy. You stare out at the Bosphorus, where cargo ships drift silently past, some loaded with goods, others with scrolls, and one possibly with accountants who were never allowed to retire. It's hard to say. Remember the goat. He's now officially a taxable citizen. You passed him today with a tag tied to his horn. Property class D. Livestock literate. He's climbing the ranks faster than you. The stars come out slowly, one by one, like old bureaucrats clocking in late. You lean back, your tunic sticking slightly to your shoulders, the scent of ink and compromise still clinging to your hair. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the empire sleeps with you crumbling softly. But in perfect alphabetical order, you are not sure if you're dreaming, or just stuck between layers of ink and fatigue. But the morning arrives anyway, slow and slightly accusatory. The sun peeks through your window like a curious official wondering if your presence has been properly filed. You are greeted with a new assignment, this one handwritten on a square of linen and sealed with something that smells suspiciously like fish oil. Your task: serve as Deputy Fish Inspector General of the Bosphorus. No further instructions, no training, just a title, a badly stitched badge, and a list of 42 rules, only 5 of which make sense in any language you speak. You head down to the harbor, accompanied by a basket, a spoon, and a young boy named Ada who's only there because he lost a bet. The docks are chaos, sailors shouting, vendors hawking fried octopus, cats leaping between barrels like free little tax evaders. You're supposed to determine whether each fish being sold is fresh enough to be consumed by Ottoman citizens, but not too fresh, which apparently makes people suspicious. There's a protocol for testing freshness. One involves poking the fish's eye and waiting for a specific kind of blink. Another requires reciting a line from a Sufi poem while holding the fish upside down. You try both, and the fish remains uncooperative. Ada shrugs. Maybe it's emotionally unavailable. That's a category D. You attempt to confiscate a crate of questionable mackerel, but the seller produces a document stamped by the Guild of Aquatic Weavers, authorizing sale under the moonlight exception. This clause, you're told, allows fish caught during odd-numbered weeks to be sold with a reduced freshness threshold provided they were stored near a window and blessed by a man named Yusuf. No one knows where Yusuf is. Someone thinks he moved to Venice. Historians still argue whether Ottoman fish inspection was a real position or simply a satirical role invented to mock imperial micromanagement. One document from 1712 outlines the official uniform for the Fish Inspector General, consisting of striped robes, waterproof slippers, and a feathered hat meant to resemble a seagull so as not to frighten the merchandise. Another source lists 14 types of fish-related paperwork, including the dreaded Form 17K, application for permission to disregard anchovy expiration dates. You visit a second dock. A man hands you a fish that smells like betrayal. You sniff. You regret it. You wave your badge and try to speak with authority. He laughs, pats your shoulder, and throws the fish back into the Bosphorus if the fish wants to go. He says, "Who are we to stop it?" By midday, you've documented 7 questionable sturgeons, 3 emotionally distant eels, and 1 fish that may have been a wet shoe. Ada has wandered off to trade oyster shells for a map of fictitious lighthouses. You're on your own. You try setting up a small inspection booth. You write official fish evaluations on a plank of wood with a piece of charcoal. A crowd gathers, mostly children, and one man who wants to sell you a pickled sardine with personality. You decline. He seems offended. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but you now own 6 different kinds of fish oil and a headache shaped like a tax ledger. The harbor breeze carries a mix of salt, vinegar, and slow decay. You begin to suspect that no one here has read the rules, yet everyone quotes them with total certainty. You confiscate 1 crate successfully, a batch of shellfish labeled partially speculative. You haul it back to the inspection center, only to be told that mollusks fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Bivalve Ethics. You are gently, but firmly, reassigned. Back at your quarters, you write your day's report. Inspected. Fish did not appreciate it. Possible collusion between fish and vendors. Recommend further study or resignation. You fold the paper and leave it under your tunic. It won't be read. It doesn't matter. Remember the goat he now owns. A boat. Or at least someone said they saw him on a boat, wearing a tiny hat and pointing at a crate of sardines. You no longer question these things. You sit on the steps, watching the moon rise above the city's spires. The Bosphorus glistens in the distance, dark and full of secrets. A fish leaps, or maybe it falls. Either way, you salute it with quiet respect. You've seen enough for one day. It starts with a ceremony. Well, a suggestion of one. You're summoned to the courtyard behind the Ministry of Ornamentation Logistics, where a circle of men in increasingly extravagant shoes stare at you like you've just insulted their stitching. You haven't. Yet, today, you've been promoted. That's the word to the noble rank of Shukis-in-Chief. You stare at the letter. It's written in gold ink on what appears to be cured fruit leather. The position, apparently, has been vacant since the last office holder went rogue and tried to kiss a slipper out of sequence. They say he's still wandering the palace halls, muttering about buckles. You are handed a manual. It is 143 pages long and consists entirely of illustrations demonstrating proper toe angle etiquette and emotional posture while performing your duties. You are expected to kiss ceremonial footwear, specifically the left shoe of visiting. Dignitaries only, after it has been certified for kissability by the Department of Soul Hygiene. If you kiss before the shoe is verified, it's considered a diplomatic incident. If you kiss too long, it's considered treason. If you refuse to kiss, you may be reassigned to sock counting. You are not ready for a sock counting. Your supervisor, a former lieutenant with delicate hands and dead eyes, walks you through your first assignment. The Emir of Croman is visiting, and you must honor his rival with 3 measured pecks to the outer arch of his embroidered mule slippers. You ask if the Emir's footwear has been sanitized. The supervisor blinks slowly and replies, emotionally, yes, the ceremony is crowded. Drummers, courtiers, pigeons. You kneel beside the ornate sandal, lips hovering, breath held, soul. Briefly exiting your body, you perform the triple kiss. The crowd murmurs approvingly. A court official notes your form was moderately reverent. You exhale for the first time in an hour. But the slipper was presented in the wrong orientation. You've technically kissed the Emir's right shoe, a violation of Ordinance to 7C. The clerk appears from behind a curtain holding a scroll. We'll need a clarification kiss, he says. You comply. The crowd applauds. Historians still debate the origins of this peculiar ritual. Some trace it back to an attempt by an overly poetic sultan to outdo Persian court etiquette. Others say it began when a diplomat tripped over his own sandals and a helpful servant accidentally created a tradition. There's even a theory that the ritual began as satire, but the joke was lost sometime round the 150th decree. Your day continues, you kiss for slippers, one boot, and something called a festive foot trap used only on feast days honoring minor celestial events. You are introduced to the Royal Slipper Inventory Ledger, 23 volumes cataloguing every shoe that has ever been kissed, miskissed, or refused. Volume 11 is missing. No one speaks of it. You ask if you can take a break. A junior scribe informs you that in order to rest, you must first submit a Form 1-K temporary suspension of lip-based honors, co-signed by two witnesses who've never worn shoes with laces. You give up and sit quietly under a statue of a large two. Your mouth is dry. Your knees ache. You've been bowing all day, sometimes to people, sometimes to shoes that turn out to be ceremonial decoys. There's a lesson in that somewhere, but your brain is too tired to learn it. A foreign diplomat enters the court, wearing a pair of golden slippers encrusted with sapphires. They glisten like wealth and poor judgment. You prepare to honor them. When a clerk halts you, those, he whispers, are decoys for a regional misdirection. Kiss at your peril. You salute and retreat. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but at this point, you'd gladly trade it for a dry towel, the removal. A free official ribbon pins currently jabbing into your collarbone. Remember the goat? He's now listed as a backup ceremonial footwear tester. You spot him in the corner wearing a single felt shoe and glaring at a janitor. He's doing well for himself. As the day winds down, you wipe your lips with a cloth stamped property of the slipper department. Your mouth tastes faintly of leather, dust, and misplaced ambition. You've memorized the curvature of at least 7 different noble heels. You've perfected the angle of reverent bowing. You've seen a grown man cry over a scuff on a diplomatic sandal. You head back to your quarters and sit very still, hoping your knees forget they exist. Outside, the moon rises slowly, reflected in puddles that shimmer like polished soles. Somewhere in the distance, a slipper is being buffed for tomorrow's ceremony. You close your eyes and imagine the world with no shoes, only clouds, silence, and cool, barefoot freedom. You wake to a knock, slow and ominous, like someone politely asking for the last crumbs of your will to live. Outside your door stands a Creole wrapped in 3 layers of bureaucracy, a sash of authorization, a badge of distribution, and a small plaque that simply reads urgent. He hands you a scroll sealed in wax that smells like mildew and anxiety. You open it and read, aloud, to no one in particular, by order of the Office of Atmospheric Regulation and Domestic Proximity. You are hereby summoned to submit a permit for the consumption of air within 5 meters of any registered window. You reread the line, hoping it might change. DOES in single quotes T. You are now responsible for filing a permit to breathe. Not air in general, just air near windows. Not all windows, just those inspected in the last 4 years and certified under the moderately transparent but structurally sound classification. Your neighbor, who recently moved 3 feet to the left to avoid window tax, gives you a pitying look and shuts his curtain. You envy his privacy and his certified air. At the Bureau of Window Permissions, the clerk is asleep. Not gently, deeply. The sign above his head reads, Forms to Q through 9S accepted only when the moon is in decline. You ask what phase the moon is in today. He opens one eye and replies. Indecisive, you sit and wait, and wait. A cat walks in, drops a dead beetle on the counter, and is immediately handed a temporary sunbeam license. You're still holding your breath metaphorically and soon, literally, eventually, the clerk gives you Form 6E, application for proximity breathing. It asks for your name, window coordinates, estimated lung capacity, and your philosophical stance on open-air ethics. You fill it out slowly, your pen scratching across paper like a desperate insect looking for an exit. You return the form. "I'll need proof of light exposure," the clerk says. You blink. From the window, 2 witnesses must confirm you've stood near it. Bonus if one of them is nobility. You thank him. You do not mean it. Historians still argue whether these bizarre breathing regulations were ever enforced seriously or merely served Ray. Enforce the Empire's passion for paperwork. Some suggest the entire system originated during a ventilation panic, after rumors of cursed wind passing through unblessed shutters. Others believe it was a tax scheme disguised as respiratory management. One scholar claimed the air permit system was designed solely to keep citizens indoors, quiet and mildly confused. You find your landlord, who agrees to serve as witness. But only if you promise to identify as passively breathing rather than actively inhaling. You nod. He nods. The second witness is a potted plant that's been in the hallway since 1693. You name it Hazen. You return to the bureau, present your documents, and receive a tiny stamp shaped like a lung. "Keep this visible," the clerk mumbles. "We've had incidents." You ask what kind of incidents. He holds up a taxidermied pigeon and doesn't elaborate. You exit quickly. On your way back, you pass an old man arguing with a lamppost over shadow ownership. You pass a young boy writing a poem about sunlight regulations. You pass a goat wearing goggles and nibbling on a curtain. Yes, that goat. He's been promoted to assistant ventilation monitor. He snorts as you pass. You're not sure if it's contempt or allergy. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but you've learned that your lungs are technically a taxable space, and your nostrils now fall under public infrastructure. Back at home, you open the window just slightly and take a deep breath. It tastes like freedom, paperwork, and boiled lentils from your neighbor's stovetop. You sit in silence, grateful you have permission to do so, for now. Then you notice your window's frame has shifted half a centimeter to the right, placing it officially outside the coordinates on your form. You sigh quietly, not too deeply, not near the window. You'll need another permit. You rest your forehead against the wall and wonder how anyone breathes in peace. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps peace is merely the illusion that no one's measuring. Your exhalation. You crawl into bed and wrap yourself in a blanket that hasn't yet been classified as a curtain. A soft breeze moves through the cracks, illegal, probably. But it smells like sea salt and old cedar, and one good memory from childhood that no one ever taxed. You begin the day in darkness, not metaphorical, actual. Your candle stub finally gave up some time before dawn, and the hallways of the Records Bureau feel even narrower when lit only by the occasional flicker of bureaucratic resolve. Today, you've been assigned to the archivists of forgotten things. No one tells you what that means. They simply hand you a brass key, a pair of gloves, and a scroll so faded it might be blank. The archives lie beneath the city, buried under layers of stone and indifference. You descend a spiral staircase that seems to question your choices with each creak. At the bottom, a massive door, inscribed with the words "We remember what was meant to be misplaced." It opens with a sound like a disappointed librarian sighing through time. Inside, rows upon rows of shelves stretch out endlessly. Scrolls, ledgers, crumbling lists, empty ink bottles, broken wax seals. You're greeted by a woman named Melek, who has the eyes of someone who's seen too many receipts. She wears a cape made of paper scraps and smells faintly of lost appointments. "We archive the irrelevant," she says, without humor, so that irrelevance remains organized. Your first task is to catalog hinges, not functioning hinges, not famous hinges, just broken ones, removed from bureaucratic doors decades ago and lovingly preserved in numbered boxes. Each hinge has its own card. Where it broke, why it broke speculative, and whether it groaned in protest. You learn to distinguish between Moody Creek and existential wine. One box contains only a single nail and a note. Belonged to a filing cabinet that never opened. Belief-based storage. You log it under metaphysical hardware. Another box is mysteriously warm to the touch. You don't open it. No one does. Melek guides you through the drawer of unsent decisions. Inside, proposals never reviewed, verdicts never signed, orders never delivered. One decree reads, all citizens of Bursa must adopt a pigeon. It was dated 1631, unsigned, and accompanied by a feather that smells like rebellion. Historians still argue whether this department actually served a functional role or was simply where inconvenient power. Her work went to fade quietly. Some claim the sultans believed even unimportant things held divine weight. Others argue it was a jobs program designed to keep philosophers and hoarders from organizing rebellions. Either way, someone once filed an entire collection of unspoken wishes documented in blank scrolls, labeled with names no one can pronounce. You discover a stack of rejection letters addressed to fictional bureaucrats' names like Ruma, Unconsulted, and Fatma of the redundant ledger. These personas were apparently created during a shortage of real officials, used to approve minor decisions, then retired when they developed fan followings. One has a commemorative spoon. Your pen scratches slowly across paper. Dust settles on your sleeve like the memory of forgotten meetings. There's a gentle reverence here, a quiet insistence that nothing, not even the misfiled or irrelevant, should be left entirely behind. In one corner, you find a cabinet labeled things too complicated to explain. Melek warns you not to open it. You nod. But curiosity wins. Inside, a single wooden stamp. You press it to a blank sheet. It reads, "We regret the clarity." You place the sheet back where it came from. That feels safer. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But if it weren't, there'd be no signal down here anyway. You'd probably receive a message that says, "Update required. Please define relevance. Remember the goat. He has a folder now." Melek shows you. Applied twice for window breathing rights. Once for a ceremonial hoofwear, she explains. Denied all three. Still ascended. At the end of your shift, Melek offers you a cup of tea made from documents too moldy to salvage. You sip it. It tastes like must and memory. You feel oddly calm. You ask why they keep it, or why preserve the overlooked, the unused, the barely relevant. Melek shrugs. Because forgetting is a form of rebellion. And this empire isn't fond of rebels. You climb the stairs slowly, each step heavier with invisible things, above ground. The sun has begun to set, casting long shadows shaped like unanswered questions. You walk home quietly, pockets full of borrowed dust, and as you curl up to sleep that night, you wonder what future archivist will log this very day under events of uncertain significance. Filed for atmosphere, you wake to paperwork, not the metaphorical kind, the actual, flaking, ink-splotched mass of it, stacked beside your cot like an administrative avalanche waiting to happen. Someone slid it under your door in the night, along with a note that simply says, "Census Day. Bring boots. You have no boots. You have sandals that squeak and a pair of socks once mistaken for a tax receipt. Your orders are clear, if not helpful. Conduct a census of the outer districts, cross-check village head counts, and report any anomalous populations." Beneath that, a footnote reads, "Anomalous. Ghost towns, invented hamlets, overly enthusiastic goats. You sigh. You pack your ledger, a map from the 1400s that insists rivers flow uphill, and a pocket full of dried figs by the time you reach the outskirts of the capital. The city behind you looks less like an empire and more like a rumor of one. The first village on your list is Kizildir, except no one's sure where it is. Your map shows it nestled beside a forest, but the road leads you to a wheat field and a sign pointing the wrong way, labeled Kizildirish. A man tending sheep nearby shrugs when you ask. Sometimes it's there, he says. Sometimes it's in the hills. You ask how a village can move. He replies, how can a census be real if the ink washes off in the rain? You write, location pending in your ledger, and move on. The second village is more promising. It has houses, people, even a schoolroom, where children recite multiplication tables while chewing on pine bark. But when you begin your head count, the problem emerges. Everyone here claims to be someone else. The baker is listed as the mayor. The mayor insists he's a shepherd named Hazen. Two identical twins both claim to be the same person. We share taxes, one says and pants. The other adds, you nod, note it down, and question reality just a little more. The third village does not exist. At least, that's what the locals in the fourth village insist. We've never heard of it, they say, while pointing directly at a cluster of rooftops on the nearby hill. Those aren't real, just illusions left behind after a failed audit. You hike there anyway. It's real, sort of. Doors don't open. Smoke rises from chimneys without fire. A boy with mismatched eyes hands you a fish and tells you the census was already taken last year by someone who never left. You leave her. Note in the ledger, village exists but refuses to identify as such. Possible metaphysical settlement. Recommend philosophical review. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans created ghost villages deliberately as a tactic for inflating tax rolls, confusing invaders, or simply as placeholders for future populations. Some records describe towns with full bureaucracies, listed officials, and even registered cat populations despite no one ever having seen them in person. Others suggest it was all part of a grand imperial juke that got out of hand and somehow made it into law. You return to the city after dusk, pockets full of contradictory evidence, names that changed spelling mid-sentence, and a bruised toe from kicking a rock that claimed to be a post office. You hand in your census scroll to the Bureau of Demographic Fluidity, where a man with no eyebrows accepts it silently, stamps it 3 times, and feeds it into a furnace labeled seasonal adjustments. You ask what happens now. He says, the villages will be reshuffled. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but today you received 400 notes from people who may not exist. One of them invited you to tea in a place that disappeared after you left. Remember the goat? He's been elected mayor of one of the imaginary villages. His victory speech was reportedly just a sneeze, but it's being transcribed by the Guild of Interpretive Intent. Back in your room, you examine the map again. This time, 2 rivers have changed course and 1 village now appears in the sea. You smile. It's not madness. It's just administration at its most creative. You lie back, your mind floating with phantom habits. Duplicate shepherds and children who count by whispering. Somewhere in the darkness, a census form fills itself. Out in your name, this time, it lists your occupation as cartographer of the unreal. You awaken to the sound of fabric being argued over. Outside your window, recently reclassified as a controlled ventilation threshold. 2 men in tall turbans are locked in a heated, whisper-level debate about circumference regulations. One insists his headgear is perfectly within the accepted limits of ceremonial flair. The other gestures furiously at a scroll that flutters like a bureaucratic butterfly caught in an existential gust. You've seen this before. Today is Turban Inspection Day. You've been summoned to the Imperial Turban Licensing Office, not because you own a turban you don't, though you once used a towel in protest of the air permit fees, but because you've been chosen as a visual harmonization assistant, which roughly translates to person who squints at hats and makes noises of either approval or concern. The office itself is an architectural marvel of linen and contradiction. Spools of silk drape from the ceiling. Tapestries display the sanctioned folds of previous centuries. And every official wears something on their head that looks like either a pastry or a deeply symbolic interpretation of one. You're handed a checklist and a diagram labeled acceptable turban behaviors. Yes, behaviors you are told to inspect for asymmetry, symbolism, fabric provenance, moral tone, and seasonal appropriateness. There's even a color wheel annotated with emotional ranges. Pale green, serenity, crimson, dangerously passionate, eggshell, suspicious neutrality. Your first client is a merchant whose turban is folded so precisely it hums in the sunlight. You admire the craftsmanship. Then note a deviation. 7 folds instead of 9. He frowns. It's intentional. He says, a tribute to my grandfather, who believed in structural minimalism. You nod and write. Possibly heretical grandfather. Recommend further folding. The next is a dervish whose turban includes small-stitched verses of poetry. Beautiful, illegal. You suggest he rotate the fabric so the lines aren't legible. He agrees, but you see in his eyes that the poem remains, silently resisting. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans used turban regulations to promote social order, religious conformity, or simply to keep textile merchants in business. Some claim the empire employed a team of fold masters trained from childhood to identify spiritual imbalance in headdress structure. Others insist it was all a deeply elaborate prank by a bored sultan who once lost a bet and had two. Wear a turban shaped like a pomegranate for a week. You are asked to judge a nobleman's turban. Towering, elaborate, and so large it casts a measurable shadow across the registry floor. You raise your checklist but are interrupted. He's exempt. A clerk whispers, he owns the ribbon factory. Of course he does. You approve the turban and wonder if you might someday be wealthy enough to redefine headwear's philosophy. Midday arrives with a lunch break and a lecture from the Grand Inspector of Spherical Proportions. He reads from a scroll titled The Turban and the State, a circular relationship, while sipping soup from a bowl shaped like an underfold. You take notes, you forget them instantly. Back on duty, you meet a boy whose turban is too colorful, stitched with thread from 3 unauthorized provinces. You're about to issue a citation when he hands you a note for school play. I'm the son. You stamp it with a provisional exemption and wish him luck. By late afternoon, your vision begins to blur. Every head seems wrapped in some variation of regulation and rebellion. Linen, silk, wool, brocade. Some turbans tell stories, others shout arguments. A few seem to apologize. You write all of this in the margins of your checklist. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But if it weren't, the notifications would surely include. Your turban requires an update and error. Emotional texture incompatible with local policy. Remember the goat. He's seated at the end of the inspection hall, wearing a modest woolen turban that meets every specification. Rumor has it he now serves as a cultural advisor. You watch as 3 officials consult him before approving a feather-adorned design from the eastern provinces. The goat nods once. It is enough that you leave the office with aching eyes and a new appreciation for a fabric's ability to contain both identity and submission. You pass a mirror and catch your reflection slightly crooked, slightly dusty, but still you. You wonder what kind of turban you'd wear. Given the choice, probably something small, soft, easy to forget. You return home, your checklist fluttering in your hand like a reluctant dove. You place it beside your bed and fall asleep to the imagined rustle of 1,000 folds in the wind, layered like memory, spiraling like time. The summons rives roll tightly in a scroll tube labeled and clear. No wax seal, no title, just a line of handwriting that looks like it was scrawled mid-sneeze. Report to Department of Roll Stable. Itty and vertical confusion. You blink at it, then reread, then blink again. That's not a department you've heard of. That's not a department anyone has heard of. But at this point, you've been everything from an air permit petitioner to a slipper consultant, so confusion is your most familiar office now. You follow the directions, vague as they are. Walk until the cobblestones become self-conscious, then turn left. Eventually, you reach a building that looks more like an abandoned bathhouse than an administrative hub. The stone is warm, the door half open, and the air smells like old ink and unresolved hierarchies. Inside, you find a table. Behind it, a man in layered robes that shimmer differently depending on your moral clarity. He gestures for you to sit. Then he places two documents in front of you. One says, "You are hereby dismissed from all Imperial service positions, effective immediately, for reasons including but not limited to prolonged confusion, accessory to misfiled documents, and questionable breathing cadence." The other says, "You are hereby promoted to senior bureaucratic liaison of undefined duties, with authority to audit others of equivalent ambiguity." You ask which one is real. The man shrugs. Both. You are now simultaneously fired and promoted. You've entered what they call bureaucratic limbo, a status reserved for those who have touched too many departments, worn too many hats sometimes literally, and can no longer be classified safely. You're given an office. It has no door. There's a desk with one drawer that won't open and a chair made of documents stapled into furniture. On your wall, a small sign, in Latin, that roughly translates to "Don't worry." We're not sure either. Your duties include checking whether people still exist in the system, updating forms that update other forms, and attending meetings held in imaginary time slots. You receive two salaries, one theoretical, one in dried apricots. You attempt to file a leave request, but are told you now outrank the concept of vacation. When you ask who you report to, you're shown a mirror dotted lunch. Someone brings you soup. It contains 3 noodles and a coin. You eat 2 of the noodles and keep the coin. It might be your pension. Historians still argue whether this role existed in any official sense or was simply a way to house problematic scribes who couldn't be trusted with stamps anymore. One theory suggests the Empire, at its most bloated, developed reflexive bureaucracy. Offices that governed their own paperwork. Positions like yours were created not to function, but to exist as evidence of imperial flexibility. You're not sure if that makes you important or decor. Later that day, a messenger arrives with a question. Would you like to audit yourself? You ask if it's mandatory. No. He says, but refusing implies compliance. And compliance suggests contradiction. You nod like that makes sense. He leaves you a stack of forms labeled Internal Paradox Acknowledgement Series. You spend the afternoon pretending to be your own assistant. You respond to your own memos with vague encouragement and copy yourself on replies. A small pigeon flies in, delivers a note that says "Nice turban yesterday," then promptly relieves itself on your theoretical budget ledger. You thank it anyway. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But today someone handed you a stone tablet that simply reads status, pending. You're beginning to suspect that's your soul. Remember the goat? He shows up round midday. Not in person, just a sketch of him taped to your wall with the words Honorary Vice Coordinator of Undefined Influence. Below it, a note. He says you're doing fine. You pin it up proudly. By evening, your chair has collapsed, but your rank remains intact. You write your daily report in invisible ink and mail it to yourself. You forget what it said. Halfway through, that feels correct. As the candles dim, you stare at the ceiling and think about all the roles you've played, the scrolls you've stamped, the shoes you've kissed, the feathers you've logged. You realize you've become the Empire itself, not its power or glory, but its quiet indecision, its beautiful inefficiency, its elegant, spiraling confusion. You close your eyes. You're both promoted and dismissed, essential and unnecessary, present and provisional. And finally, unbothered, you're sent a notice, not by courier, nor a goat this time, but by a man who appears in your room, says nothing, hands you a scroll, then vanishes into the curtains. You read it twice before accepting its reality. You are now assigned to the inspection committee from Moonlight Markets. You have no idea what that is, neither does anyone else. That, apparently, is the point. You're told the Moonlight Markets operate unofficially, inconsistently, and with a sort of elegant denial from everyone involved. They are not outlawed, exactly, but they are governed by shadow rules, enforced by people like you, the inspectors of nighttime trade, whose job is to make sure no one sells anything too efficiently or too openly after dusk. You begin your patrol just after twilight, dressed in a robe that reflects no light and carrying a lantern that cannot be lit. Standard inspector gear, according to the guidebook you were handed, which consists of one sentence on a napkin. Keep them honest, or at least interesting. You start down an alley where the air smells like roasted dates and mild conspiracy. The stalls are arranged like secret sangle, uneven, covered in fabrics whose patterns seem to shift the more you squint. A woman sells a legal night. Cheese, soft, warm, and forbidden after sundown. You ask her for a documentation. She hands you a slice of melon. You nod. She nods. That counts. A man nearby peddles emotionally verified soap, made from tears collected during government hearings. He claims it prevents regret. You raise an eyebrow. He offers a discount. You take a sample. There are rules, though no one agrees on them. Markets may only operate during even-numbered weeks. Sellers must include a poetic justification for each item sold. Bartering is allowed only with currencies that no longer exist. You confiscate a jar of pickled garlic labeled Provincial Truth Serum. The merchant argues. You return it. He gives you a wink. It might have been a threat. Historians still argue whether the Moonlight Markets were tolerated anomalies or sanctioned performances in bureaucratic drag. Some say they were created as release valves, places for citizens to indulge in low-level illegality without disrupting the Empire's image. Others believe they were experiments in alternate economies, designed by a reformist vizier who once tried to pay his staff in riddles. You pass a stall selling blank scrolls marketed as pre-approved confessions, and other vendor hawks slightly used amulets with the slogan, "Cursed, but gently." You ask for a license. He hands you a feather and a rhyme about onions. It checks out. Your lantern glows briefly. Inexplicably, you ignore it. You're learning to live in undefined states light. Dark, approval, tolerance. A man waves you over to taste a fig stuffed with licorice and ideology. You decline. He offers a tax exemption. You accept the fig. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but tonight a cat whispered directions to you in Ottoman script. You follow them and found a teapot filled with coins from a dynasty no one remembers. You left it untouched. The coins were humming. Remember the goat? Of course you do. He runs a stall now, quiet, elegant, perfectly ranged. He sells one item only. Unofficial silence. People line up for it. You salute him. He nods once. You all recognize Dot as the night deepens. The market gets quieter, slower. Transactions shift from goods to stories, then from stories to looks, then from looks to silence. You take notes, but they vanish from the page. Your ledger refuses ink. You accept this eventually. Dawn approaches. A bell rings not officially. Just someone's idea of closure. The stalls fold. The people vanish. You stand alone in a courtyard that looks too innocent for what it just hosted. You return to the inspection bureau. It's empty. As always, you file a report that reads, order maintained. Rules ambiguous. Night peaceful. You place your lantern on the desk, where it flickers once. Then DARKENS. You go home with cheese in your pocket, soap in your satchel, and a feeling that you've witnessed something both forbidden and deeply approved. You're halfway through your breakfast, one boiled egg, one contemplative stare into the distance when another assignment arrives. This time rolled tightly and tied with a ribbon that smells like lavender and mild alarm. You unfurl it slowly. The ink is faint, the lettering flurry, and the header unmistakably ridiculous. Official appointment, secretary to the Sultan's left elbow. You pause, read it again. Not the Sultan's council, not his chamber, not even his unjust. The elbow, the left one. You head to the palace in a sort of daze, unsure whether this is a promotion, a curse, or perhaps just another episode in the Empire's long-standing war against linear logic. The guard at the gate sees your scroll, sighs heavily, and waves you through without a word. Apparently, you are not the first inside the outer court. You're guided through marbled halls and whispered protocols until you're deposited in a small antechamber decorated exclusively with elbow-sized pillows and ledgers labeled minor joint decrease. A scribe greets you with the gentleness of someone who has finally accepted that reality is optional. Welcome, she says. We've been waiting since 1582. She hands you your toolkit, a quill carved from left-wing peacock feather, a ruler shaped like a crescent moon, and a cloth used exclusively for polishing the elbow chair. You sit. You wait. At precisely the 3rd hour after midday, the Sultan appears, his full regalia billowing, his procession trailing incense and heavy silence. He takes his place on the imperial divan. Right elbow supported by velvet, left elbow hovering over the joint consultation cushion. Your job is simple. Record any shifts, twitches, rests, or symbolic angles performed by the elbow, as each one, according to the court's ceremonial interpretation, has diplomatic implications. A still elbow signals approval. A lean implies hesitation. A scratch means war. Today, the elbow remains motionless for 43 minutes. You record this under the category strategic stillness. Then, ever so slightly, it dips toward the cushion. You glance at your supervisor. She nods gravely. Recalibrate the taxes in Anatolia. She whispers. You don't question it. Historians still argue whether the Sultan's left elbow ever actually held bureaucratic weight, or whether the entire position was created by a bored astrologer hoping to confuse French ambassadors. One scholar claimed the elbow had a dedicated ink budget, another that it once vetoed a military campaign simply by refusing to bend. Your daily duties expand. You must now track the elbow's proximity to foreign fabrics, particularly those imported from rival courts. One day, a silk sleeve brushes the elbow too aggressively, prompting a 6-day debate over trade etiquette. You are called to testify. You write a report titled Friction, Fabric, and Fealty. It receives an honorary ribbon. By week's end, Your records span 13 volumes, each filled with diagrams of elbows in repose, annotations of muscle tone, notes on humidity's effect on joint-based symbolism. You start dreaming in angles. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead, but you've learned to communicate with the elbow via a soft nod and a respectful glance. Today it dipped briefly toward the west, either a sign of peace or a mild cramp. You recommend both interpretations, just to be safe. Remember the goat. He shows up unannounced during an elbow rest break, carrying a scroll-marked quadrupedal joint protocol. He's been appointed liaison to the Sultan's right knee. You meet during joint recess and share figs in silence. He wears a sash. You're happy for him. You begin to realize this isn't about elbows, or joints, or anything anatomical. It's about control, the subtle language of symbols. The Empire's ability to turn even body parts into policy. You are not documenting movement. You are transcribing intention. One day, the elbow rises unexpectedly. The court gasps. A chamberlain faints. You record it as gesture of mild apocalypse, unconfirmed. No one corrects you. You're getting good at this. As the evening call to prayer echoes through the city. You sit by the window in your modest quarters, flipping through elbow sketches and sipping heavily spiced tea. The world outside moves without scrutiny. But here, in the palace, every bend of bone is prophecy. You lie down, the scent of silk and ink still clinging to your sleeves, and imagine tomorrow's shift. Perhaps the elbow will hover. Perhaps it will rest. Perhaps, for once, it will simply be tired. Just like you, there's a sound this morning, not the rooster, not the scroll courier, not even the ceremonial goat chewing metaphorically on your dreams. It's a hollow knock, 3 times, then silence. You open your door to find nothing but a single sheet of parchment on the floor. No ribbon, no signature, just 7 words written in deep red ink. You have 1 form left to submit. It feels final. You've spent weeks in the depths of Ottoman paperwork, logging feathers, kissing shoes, inspecting ghost villages, tracking the emotional temperatures of turbans. You've questioned fish. You've questioned yourself. You've saluted an elbow. You've been dismissed, promoted, dissolved, and realigned. You've met a goat with better job security than most clerics. And now, apparently, you are at the end of the line. You ask round. No one knows what this final form is. The Department of Final Forms is either myth or misplaced in the 17th century floor plan. The librarian at the Imperial Archives hands you a blank sheet and whispers. Sometimes it finds you. That's not helpful. So you begin to walk through alleyways of forgotten scrolls, past fountains that may or may not be metaphors, through the hall of unspecified duties, past the stairwell that leads to nowhere but still has a receptionist. Each person you meet points. Vaguely east, you follow. You reach a small wooden building that leans slightly, as if unsure whether it should to remain standing. Inside, 1 chair, 1 desk, 1 clerk. His robes are grey, not from color, but from sheer exhaustion. He gestures to the seat without looking up. You're here, he says. Took you longer than most. You ask what the final form is. He slides a parchment across the table. There's no title, just 1 line. Describe your time in the Empire. You hesitate. What do you write? That you kissed the wrong shoe and were forgiven by someone's cousin? That you chased phantom villages through fog and bureaucracy? That you once believed in clean endings before the fish inspector told you freshness was a philosophy? You take the quill and begin. It was all absurd and beautiful and slow. You write about the goat, about the elbow, about the soap made of emotion and the tax dispute that ended in a poem. You write until your hand aches and your eyes blur. Then you stop. You sign your name. The clerk takes it, stamps it with a blank seal, and nods. You're cleared. For what? You ask Dot. He doesn't answer. He gestures to a door behind him, one you hadn't noticed before. You walk toward it slowly. The hinges creak, as if remembering every door you've opened and every one that refused you. The door leads to a courtyard, small and plain. There's a bench. You sit. The sun is setting. No ceremony. No final proclamation. Just silence. Warm, uneventful. You realize that this, too, has been catalogued somewhere. You're sitting. You're sighing. Your absence of purpose. Someone, somewhere, has filed your fatigue. Meanwhile, your phone is still dead. But it doesn't matter. Not anymore. Remember the goat. He walks past, annoyed, wearing a modest sash that reads now just a goat. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't need to. You lean back, watching the clouds smear across the sky like half-erased scrolls. You are no longer an inspector or a scribe. You are not waiting in line. You are not documenting decisions that fold in on themselves. You are nothing. You are finally nothing, and it feels restful. Tonight. You've traveled far, not in distance, but through folds of thought, through layers of parchment and poetry, through corners of an empire that ran on ink more than it did on blood. You've wandered dusty halls, sat beside forgotten hinges, bowed to ceremonial footwear, and quietly learned how a civilization could turn paperwork into philosophy. You've met absurdity and bowed politely. You've waited in lines that led to more lines, questioned the emotional state of fish, and written your own name in invisible ink just to see if anyone noticed. Now, you're here, in the soft afterglow of a story that never needed to rush. Let it settle in your chest like an old, well-folded tunic. Let it warm you, not because it made sense, but because it did not. Because in its slow unraveling, it invited you to breathe more gently, to laugh without needing a reason, to sit still without performance. Let your body sink. Let the noise of stamps and sessions, of titles and seals, of things that almost mattered fade, like dust swept quietly under the Empire's last rub. The bench is empty now. The moon is high. The goat has gone. And in the quiet, there is no form to fill, no elbow to interpret, no breath to register or tally. There's only rest, long, uninterrupted, unquestioned rest. Let your mind exhale. Let your story pause. The Empire may continue without you now, spinning scrolls in your absence, stamping things you'll never read. But tonight, for once, you are not part of its machinery. You are simply still. The air is cooler now. Your name is unspoken, and that is perfectly, beautifully fine.